I can show you that 87% of Christians are worshiping an imaginary God. Now, that may sound like a bold and rather outrageous claim, right? But before you dismiss it, let me explain. The number 87% isn't random. It's not pulled out of thin air. It's the result of a very interesting question that was posed to 20,000 Christians in a recent poll. But why is this number so oddly specific? Why not 50% or 90% or 75%? Why 87%? Is it arbitrary? Or is there something deeper going on here? Stick around, because by the end of this video, I'll show you exactly why this number is crucial and why it reflects a deeper truth about how we understand God in Christianity, Islam, and religion in general. So what's the deal with that 87%? Well, first, let's look at whether or not it's possible for different monotheistic religions to even worship the same God. Let's start with a basic understanding of monotheism. Monotheists, whether they're Christians or Muslims or Jews, they believe, of course, that there is only one God. They believe that this God is the sole creator of the universe, the source of morality, and the ultimate being to whom all worship and all reverence are due. But here's the problem. If there is only one God, then all the other gods must be false, right? So let's imagine that we have two monotheistic religions, like Christianity and Islam. Both claim to worship the one true God. Both claim that their God is the only God and there is no other. But now, here's the dilemma. If we accept that the universe is monotheistic, that there is only one true God, we're left with two possible conclusions. Either one of these religions is worshiping a fictitious God, a God that doesn't exist, and their whole religion is based on a lie. Or both religions are worshiping the same God, whether they realize it or not, whether they want to admit it or not. Let's pause here for a second. If we can't prove or disprove the existence of a deity, and let's be honest, we can't, then we are left with claims. And claims are worthless unless they're backed up with evidence. Unfortunately, there's no empirical evidence that definitively proves any religion's gods exist. That's where things are about to get murky. Names are incredibly important in religion. Names define identities. When you call upon God in your prayer, you're not just calling out a vague deity. You're calling out to the specific identity that you've been taught to believe in. But here's the catch. What if the names that we're using are misleading? Christians use the name God or Lord, and Muslims use the name Allah. But what does that really tell us? Is it possible that both names are just different labels for the same thing? Some people called my grandpa Audi. Some people called him Sarge. I, of course, called him Grandpa. But we were all talking about the same person, the same entity. Just because my grandpa had multiple labels that changed depending upon the audience who was addressing him, that doesn't mean that these labels represented entirely different people. He was still just one guy, my grandpa. So let's go back to the Bible and see how God introduces himself. In Exodus 3, verse 14, he says, I am who I am. That's a hell of a title. This is the name of God, or at least one of the names of God. I am. It's self-defining. self-existent. The term I am is timeless, eternal, and it can apply to any being that exists beyond time. Any being that exists beyond time. Of course, through most of the text, he's simply referred to as Lord, which is an honorific used in place of his actual name, which is Yahweh. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Both Muslims and Christians tend to agree that the name of God is the I am. But in Exodus 6, verse 3, he says to Moses, I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, Yahweh, I did not make myself fully known to them. In other words, he didn't even give them the specifics. He just told them, I'm God Almighty, and that's all they knew him by. Notice how God's self-revealing name here is Yahweh. And both Muslims and Christians agree that they worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But by God's own reckoning, he never revealed his name to any of them. Not to Abraham, not to Isaac, not to Jacob. They simply knew him as God Almighty. That means on a very basic level, Christians and Muslims are talking about the same God, even if they have very different names for him. Because the Christians may now know him as Lord, which again is just an honorific in place of his name in the Hebrew text, which is Yahweh. And the Muslims may know him as Allah. But their shared progenitors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, only knew him as God Almighty. So why is there still a debate about this? Could it be that the names and labels people use are just masks that disguise the truth? If Christian and Muslims are both calling on the I am, are they worshiping the same God? Is it just the difference in their understanding of that God that keeps them apart? After all, Christians and Muslims seem to be, in most parts of the world at least, not just different religions, but very different cultures, right? So can we find the difference here in cultural analysis? Let's explore that. So let's shift gears and approach this problem from an anthropological standpoint. If Christianity and Islam arose in completely different parts of the world, with different cultures, in different time periods, and with completely separate histories, it might make sense to assume that these are two different gods, that the Christian God and the Muslim God have nothing in common. After all, different cultures have different conceptions of the divine, right? But what if we embrace the simple historical fact that Christianity and Islam share a deeply intertwined history? Both trace their origins back to Abraham, who, in the Bible, is considered the father of both faiths. And crucially, both religions trace their concept of God back to the same I am, the same God of Abraham. Let's take it further. Both Christianity and Islam recognize Genesis. They acknowledge Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, figures who are foundational to both religions. If they're both recognizing the same scriptures and the same patriarchs, doesn't that suggest they might be worshiping the same God? Remember that in Genesis 17, verse 4, God says, "As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations." Many nations. Surely you don't believe that God thought all those nations would be homogeneous. Both Christianity and Islam claim that Abraham is the father of their faith, and the God Abraham worshipped, the God of the I am, is the same one that Christians and Muslims both claim to worship. But here's the kicker. Why do 87% of Christians still reject the idea they are worshiping the same God as Muslims? This is where that 87% number comes from. Let's dive into that. You heard me right. 87% of Christians in a poll conducted by Capturing Christianity say that the Christian God is not the same as the Muslim God. Wait, what? How can that be? Let's break this down. 87% of Christians are saying they do not worship the same God as Muslims, even though both groups trace their faith back to the same historical figure in Abraham. This is where it gets interesting. What's behind this strong rejection? Is it because of doctrinal differences, like the Trinity? Or is it something deeper? After all, many Christians will point to the fact that Jesus is central to their understanding of God, while Muslims reject the divinity of Jesus. But even this disagreement doesn't change the fundamental fact that both religions claim to worship the God of Abraham. And what about the Trinity? Christians often argue that Muslims don't believe in the Trinity, but Abraham didn't know about the Trinity either. So are we really comparing apples to apples here? Or is this just an excuse to distance themselves from the other faith? Christians love to pull up this Bible verse. It's from 1 John chapter 2, verse 22. It says, "Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son. No one who denies the Son has the Father. Everyone who confesses the Son has the Father also." And when they bring up this verse, it glosses over two major facts. One is that just because you don't know how to properly worship the God doesn't mean you're worshiping a different God. They use this verse as some way of trying to tell people that your God is not the same as their God. But this says nothing about the nature of the God itself. All it says is how you get to that God. That's not the same as saying that you're worshiping a different God. But more importantly, when they pull up this verse, as Christians so often do, they can't be bothered to read this, say it with me, in context. So instead of taking this horribly out of context, let's instead read it as it was meant to be read. This is a warning against antichrists. Children, this is starting off at verse 18, not at 22. Children, it is the last hour. As you have heard that Antichrist is coming, so now many antichrists have come. From this we know that it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they did not belong to us. For if they had belonged to us, they would have remained with us. But by going out, they made it plain that none of them belonged to us. But you have been anointed by the Holy One, and all of you have knowledge. I write to you not because you do not know the truth, but because you know it, and you know that no lie comes from the truth. Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son. No one who denies the Son has the Father. Everyone who confesses the Son has the Father also. In other words, this is the writer speaking to those who already know that Jesus is the Son, and they are denying it. I'll read this to you again in a more abbreviated fashion. It says, I write to you not because you do not know the truth, but because you know it, and you know that no lie comes from the truth. But who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? In other words, he's saying if you already know that Jesus is the Christ and you deny it, then you are the Antichrist. How in the hell does that apply to any other religion who follows Jesus' Father but does not know that he is the Son? This verse isn't even about Muslims. This verse isn't about the Trinity. This verse isn't about any of that. This is saying that if you know Jesus is the Son and you deny him, then you are the Antichrist. That has nothing to do with Muslims or Jews for that matter. When we talk about something like the Trinity, and we want to use that as some definition of whether or not you are following the same God as I am, or vice versa, you need to think about how silly it sounds to define the nature of your God itself by the doctrine that you have applied to that God hundreds of years after the death of his son. One group can be convinced that I fathered a child. Another group can be adamant that I did not father a child. That doesn't make me two people. That just means that I'm one person and two groups have very different ideas about me. Even if both groups agree that I fathered a child, it's possible that one group sees my child as transcendent, divine even. The other group may see my child as just another prophet. But again, that doesn't make me two different people. I'm still just me. One person, regardless of what these competing groups think about the nature of my child. So let me say it again. 87% of Christians are rejecting the obvious connection between their God and the Muslim God, despite all the historical evidence that shows they're worshiping the same being. But what does that have to do with Christians worshiping an imaginary God? Well, let me explain that. First, I'm going to offer you an analogy to make this clearer. Imagine that Abe was visited by an alien. This alien gave Abe commands, and those commands were recorded in a written record. And let's say that there are two people, Chris and Mo, who believe in this alien. They read about Abe's encounters with the alien and they come up with their own ideas about it, but they both absolutely believe in that alien. Nevertheless, over time, they start to develop some very different ideas. You see, Chris believes that the alien had a son with a human woman, and that alien, his son, and some magical being like a space ghost make up a mystical trio. Mo, on the other hand, believes that the alien didn't have a son, and that a new prophet came much later who could speak directly to the alien. Now, these two people, Chris and Mo, they may have radically different ideas about this alien, yet at the end of the day, they're still talking about the same alien, right? This is exactly what's happening between Christianity and Islam. Even though they've developed radically different theologies, they're still talking about the same God of Abraham. So how can it be that they're still having these arguments? Well, let's come back to that 87%. 87% of Christians are refusing the most basic facts about their own faith. They are blindly rejecting the shared heritage of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the God of Abraham. Now, what happens when you blind yourself to your own religious history? When you choose not to acknowledge that the God of the Jews, the God of the Muslims, and the God of the Christians are all the same God. What happens then is that you end up creating a fictionalized version of your God. You're no longer worshiping the God of Abraham. You're worshiping a version of God that fits your own narrative. A narrative that suits your personal beliefs, not the reality of your religious tradition. This is a narrative that keeps out the people that you want to keep out and includes the people that you want to include. This is a fictionalized version of God that makes you feel warm and happy and safe and secure. But at the end of the day, it is still a fictionalized version of your own God. If you're a Christian and you refuse to accept that Muslims and Jews are worshiping the same God that you worship, then you're not worshiping the God of Abraham. It's that simple. You're worshiping a construct of your own making. And here's the kicker. According to that survey of 20,000 Christians, 87% of them are doing exactly that. I'm not telling you that your faith is meaningless. I'm not telling you that God doesn't exist, but I am saying this. If you can't even acknowledge the shared tradition that binds your faith with Judaism and Islam, then you're not truly worshiping the God of Abraham. You're worshiping an invention. You're worshiping an idea that was given to you by church leaders, or an idea that you came up with in your own mind, or an idea that just makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside, but it has no relationship to the God of Abraham. So the question remains, why is it that 87% of Christians can't see the simple truth? Because it's not about theology or doctrine. It's about dogma, defensiveness, and ethnocentricity. Thank you for joining me here on Cynical Sermons. I am your boy, Adam of NOLA. Please like, please subscribe, please do all the things. If I have gotten anything wrong, if I have offended Yahweh in any way, I would love to give him the stage right now and give him the floor and let him say whatever it is he wants to say in rebuttal to set the record straight. Yahweh? Anything to add? Well, there you have it. Yahweh endorses this as well. I appreciate you hanging with me all the way through the end of the video. I hope to see you again on future videos very soon. But until then, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.